Welcome to your Regents Review Day of solving fractional equations. So there are two ways that we're going to solve different fractional equations. The first way is the LCD method, and the LCD method is where you determine what's the least common denominator. Once you determine that, you can multiply each term by the LCD. Then you'll reduce your fractions so that there won't be any more fractions left, and you can solve for x like you normally would. The second option is solving proportions, and that only works if you have one fraction set equal to another. So only one out of the four questions below we can actually solve by cross-multiplying because it's a proportion, and we'll get to that in a minute. So in question one, we have to figure out what's the LCD between the denominators 2 and 3. So what you have to do is you have to come up with a number that both 2 and 3 can divide into evenly, and the smallest possible number that will work is 6. So we know that our LCD has to be 6, and now that we know that, we're going to multiply every single term in this equation by 6. And there are 3 terms, so you'll have to include 6 times 6, 1/2 x needs to multiply by 6, and 2/3 x has to multiply by 6. Now, we know that 6 times 6 gives us 36, and there are a few ways to multiply with fractions. So what I like to do is I like to do the simplify method where you divide first, and it's like a cross-out method. So what you do is you divide 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then that 3 gets to multiply everything that's left in the numerator, which is the 1 as well as the x. So that just turns into 3x. Now, if you don't like the cross-out method, I'll show you another method working with the other side of the equation. So the other method is where you actually turn 6 into a fraction, so 6 over 1, and you multiply the numerators together, and that will give you 12. And you multiply the denominators together, and that would give you 3, and it still has an x. And if you do this method, your next step would be to simplify, and you would get 4x. Now we can solve. So we have 36 plus 3x equals 4x. So the last thing that we're going to have to do is subtract 3x so that we can get x alone. And when we do that, we end up with 36 equals x, and we're done with question 1. Now, question 2 is different. So right now we have one fraction set equal to one fraction. So this is where we can actually cross-multiply. So what you're going to do is you're going to multiply 12 with 4n minus 1, and you're going to multiply 5n minus 2 with 10. And you don't have to show this step right here where you show it in 12 parentheses 4n minus 1, but I do think that it's helpful so that you can see that you need to distribute the 12 to both 4n and 1. Sometimes when kids don't write this step, they tend to forget to distribute properly. The other thing that people tend to forget about is where the equal sign will go. So the equal sign will go in between what you're multiplying. So on the other side of the equation, we're going to have the 10, which is multiplying with the 5n minus 2. And we'll have to distribute that 10 to both 5n and negative 2. So when we distribute the 12, we will get 48n minus 12 equals, and when we distribute the 10, we're going to get 50n minus 20. And now we can just solve to get n alone. So what I would suggest doing is I would move the 48n by subtracting to move it to the other side so that we can work with positive variables. And in the same step, if you want to, you can also add 20, because we're going to have to move that over to get the variable n by itself. So by doing that, we're going to end up with 8 equals 2n. And we have one more step. We're going to divide both sides by 2 so that our final answer will read 4 equals n or n equals 4. Either way, it works. So question 3, well, we can't cross multiply because it's not just one fraction equals one fraction. So we're going to have to figure out what the LCD is. And the numbers that we have to look at are 9, 3, and 2, because those are all our denominators. So we have to figure out the smallest possible number that 9, 3, and 2 will all divide evenly into. And if you think about it, the only number that works, well, at least the smallest number that works, is actually going to be 18, because 9 can go into 18, 3 can go into 18, as well as 2. So our LCD is going to be 18. And in this case, there are 4 terms that we need to multiply by 18. So if you want to pause the video now, you can, so that you can try this problem on your own, and then when you're ready, you can resume to make sure that you have the same answer that I get. Okay, so when you multiply every term here by 18, I am going to do the cross-out method here. I think it's quicker and I just prefer it. So with the cross-out method, I'm going to divide. And so 18 divided by 9 is going to give me 2. And then I can multiply 2 times x gives me 2x. Then I have 18 divided by 3 is 6. 6 times 4 gives me 24. And then I can't forget the equal sign that's there. And then I will have 18 divided by 2 is 9. 9 times 1x is 9x. And 18 times 1 is 18, so we just have minus 18 here. Now I have a nice problem that I can solve. So I'm going to subtract 2x to both sides. And in the same step, I'm going to add 18 to both sides so I can isolate any term with an x and any term without an x. And so when I do that, I'm going to end up with 42 equals 7x. And my last step, I'm going to divide both sides by 7, and I will end up with an answer of 6 is equal to x. And hopefully you got the same answer. Okay, so this is our last question. So if you want to pause the video now and try this completely on your own without me giving you any suggestions on what to do, you can do so now. Okay, so hopefully your first step was to determine that this is again an LCD problem because we can't cross multiply. It's not one fraction equals another fraction. So the smallest possible number that we could use here is 8, because 8 can divide nicely into 8 and 2 can divide nicely into 8. So our next step is to multiply every term by 8. And again, I'm going to use the cross-out method. So 8 divided by 8 is just 1, and 1, if I distribute it to x and 3, will not change anything. So I still just have x plus 3 here. 8 divided by 2 will give me 4, so that will turn into minus 4x when I multiply 4 and x together, equals, and then we have 8 times 5, which is 40. And now I have a nice problem, no more fractions to work with, and now I can just solve for x. So x is on the same side of the equation. I can combine these like terms. So x minus 4x will give me a negative 3x. In the same step, just to save room here, I'm going to also subtract 3 to both sides of the equation so that I can isolate my x. And I have 40 minus 3 is 37. So in the last step, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. And I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. I'm going to get x equals negative 12.3 repeating. Now, I know this isn't asking you if this is rational or irrational, but just since they might ask you this on the Regents, it's important to understand that this number is in fact rational, because anything that can be written as a fraction with integers like 37 over negative 3 is rational, and any decimal that is repeating is also a rational number. And that concludes our little mini lesson for today.